For over 25 years, all countries have met annually to negotiate a climate agreement that would reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Can you explain why they keep failing to reach an agreement?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a long history. Uh, the main reason is that there's a premise behind these negotiations, which is that voluntarily all the countries together can agree on a fair allocation of the burden. Now, the burden can either be the burden of you reducing emissions in your country or how much money you should pay me to help me reduce emissions in my country because maybe you're a richer country and I'm poorer. So the cost burden is both what you do in your country and who pays how much in total. The problem is that the interests diverge dramatically. So you'll have wealthy countries who have put a real emphasis on the need, their care for the environment, the global environment, and it's kind of a luxury of the wealthy. Developing countries, poorer countries, are saying, wait a minute, you developed because you benefited from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. Now you're telling us that we shouldn't do that, which was your path to development. So you need to pay us. You need to help us do that. And guess what? Both sides agree. Yes, we should pay you, and then you'll do it. And then the amount they're going to pay is nowhere near agreement. So poor countries at the end of every one of these negotiations end up saying, you're going to need to compensate us a huge amount not to burn fossil fuels. And the rich countries say, we'll give you a little bit, but we can't get our taxpayers to agree to give you a lot more. And sort of these empty promises of compensation.
But what about the Paris Climate Agreement from 2015? All countries did agree, and now each has a commitment. Don't we finally have success?
Yeah, so there were two things there at Paris. One was that the hosts said to who were trying to set up the agreement, so the French said, okay, everybody pick your own target and come on to Paris and ratify it. And so each country picked its own target. So if you add them up, the emissions are still keep rising and they blow away past keeping the global temperature from not rising more than 2 degrees Celsius. And also, there are no penalties if you don't miss your target. And so we're still not there. It's not a binding agreement. And if we think back to the Kyoto Agreement from 1997 that then failed in the ensuing 10 years, it failed because countries could slowly pull out of it or even stay in it and not meet their targets, and there were no penalties. And that's exactly what happened. The Americans pulled out, Canadians didn't do enough, didn't meet their target, and it slowly fell apart. So the Paris Agreement is like the Kyoto Agreement in not having any kind of compliance penalty, which is what you need.
So what then is the approach to reach an effective global agreement that would actually prevent 2 degrees Celsius of global warming?
Well, as I've been hinting at, unfortunately, it won't be a voluntary agreement. There will be carrots and sticks. And what I mean by that is that those countries who are more willing to lead right now are going to do that. They're going to put in policies as they are that reduce their domestic emissions. And but they're not just going to sit by and wishfully hope that every country will follow along. They'll set those targets, they'll be using carbon pricing and regulations, and then they're going to be joining forces. One, to, yes, provide some support for poor countries, so some financial support, the carrot, but also they're going to need to come up with the threat, a credible threat of carbon tariffs. So that's where you charge money on exports, or imports coming from countries that have not put in similarly aggressive carbon pricing and regulations. And those countries that do that, they'll probably do it in a way where they kind of form a club. We even call it a carbon club, and then use that threat of tariffs. And maybe that will lead to a global agreement at some point. But I'm just saying it won't happen in this voluntary way where everybody sort of agrees together, oh yes, here's a fair allocation of the burden. We have failed at that for over 25 years, and as long as we keep that premise, our annual negotiations internationally will continue to fail.